President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are traveling to Puerto Rico today to survey the damage from Hurricane Fiona. The massive storm struck the U.S. territory last month, causing catastrophic flooding and mudslides and knocking out power across the island.
The president has pledged his support for Puerto Rico, saying his administration has not forgotten the victims of Fiona, but some fear the total devastation in Florida caused by Hurricane Ian will shift attention and resources away from the island. For more, let's bring in Monica Feliu-Mojer. She is the Director of Communications and Science Outreach for Ciencia Puerto Rico, a nonprofit organization that advocates for scientific research on the island. Monica, I just want to make sure I said your name properly.
Monica Feliu-Mojer, yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I appreciate
That's
that.
all right.
So let's talk about President Biden. He repeated his commitment to support Puerto Rico's recovery at FEMA on Thursday. Yet his administration has faced a lot of criticism over the federal response to the devastation. Are there signs that aid is finally reaching the island, or are resources now being diverted to Florida and the Carolinas?
Well, I think it's too early to know if resources are being diverted to Florida and the Carolinas. But what is certain is that the recovery and reconstruction efforts from Hurricane Maria have failed, and so Fiona comes. We're facing a recovery on top of a failed recovery. And so one of the major concerns of people in Puerto Rico is how's that reconstruction gonna shape up?
So, Monica, as I understand it, even before this hurricane, the power grid in Puerto Rico was not 100%. That you could expect that your power was going to go out, at least once a week or whatever. So now we're facing with the prospect of rebuilding. Tens of thousands of people, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, are still without power. I can imagine what it's going to take to get the power restored, and ideally restored to the point where it's reliable.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've seen there are billions of dollars that were assigned to Puerto Rico to restore our electrical grid and make it more resilient. But very little of that money was actually spent. And as you're correctly saying, in Puerto Rico, even if there wasn't a storm, the power would go out for some people every day. And so what we're facing is a grid that's even more decrepit after Fiona. We're also facing efforts to restore electricity that have not been really transparent. There's about 10% of people that still don't have power in Puerto Rico, but we really don't know which communities are the ones without power. But, one can assume that the people that don't have power yet are the most vulnerable. We're seeing countless stories of elderly people, medically vulnerable people, people that need electricity to live, who still don't have power 2 weeks away or 2 weeks after Fiona. And I should mention that Puerto Rico lost power before the storm hit.
That's true.
Yeah. And as we've been talking, Monica, the infrastructure in Puerto Rico was weakened by Hurricane Maria 5 years ago. I mean, I saw incredible footage of bridges and structures that were built in the wake of Hurricane Maria being destroyed again before they were even done.
But that bridge was temporary. So in 5 years, they had meant to put a permanent bridge in place.
That's right. So, I mean, when we talk about the power grid, when we say does it need to be replaced, I mean, it needs to actually be built in some parts of the island.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that's going to take years. It's probably going to take decades. And so one important question to keep asking is, why wasn't it done after Maria? Something else that needs to be mentioned is that, what we're seeing in Puerto Rico is not just the impact of failed recovery and reconstruction efforts that have been really slow, but also austerity that has been imposed by the Fiscal Oversight and Management Board that was first appointed under the Obama-Biden administration. And so there's certainly a lot of questions. I think the response now needs to focus on equity, on agility, on better coordination with local authorities in Puerto Rico, but most importantly, accountability. It's really easy to pay attention to what's going on now because the catastrophe is so fresh, but a just recovery and reconstruction in Puerto Rico, that's going to take years. And so the attention needs to stay constant on what's happening in Puerto Rico, and it's to be focused on equity, because the people that are suffering from climate crises, like the one we're seeing after Fiona, it's the most vulnerable people. So the people that are already marginalized, the people that are already vulnerable, they're suffering the worst consequences. And so I hope that this visit from Biden, it's beyond a photo op, and so that it really keeps up the pressure and the accountability, because Puerto Rico deserves better.
So before we let you go, what about the medical needs? What about clean running water? How is the island doing in terms of that stuff? Are we looking at a possible humanitarian crisis if we don't have those needs met?
I think in some areas it is very possible. I think some people will tell you it's already a humanitarian crisis. In the metropolitan area, things are quote unquote back to normal, but there are still many people in the Southwest and in the mountains, areas of difficult access that they still don't have power, they still don't have water. And if they have those services, they're very unstable. They still need potable water. They need food. They need secure housing. And so I think what's really important is that we don't forget about those people that are suffering the most, that are already vulnerable, because they deserve attention and they deserve justice.
Indeed. Monica, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.